Hey guys, it's Tom here from Save the Student. Now, a couple of days ago, we got to speak to the Universities Minister Michelle Donelan. It was all part of Mental Health Awareness Week. So obviously, we spoke to her about mental health, but we also touched on a few other things, like students having to pay for accommodation during the pandemic, and also the fact that the maintenance loan just isn't enough to live on. So coming up is the interview that we did with her. So as part of Mental Health Awareness Week, we are joined by Michelle Donelan, the Minister of State for Universities. Minister, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
So we had confirmation earlier this week that students will be allowed to return in person to universities next Monday, the 17th. But for a lot of students, the year's already over, lectures are done, and some might have even finished exams by that point. So I appreciate that students obviously had to stay put for a long time to kind of suppress COVID. But throughout the pandemic, a lot of students have felt that communication with them has been quite poor, and they've maybe felt ignored by the government, which has then taken a toll on their mental health. So what do you say to students who feel like this latest announcement is just another example of them kind of being an afterthought?
Well, my first message would be they're absolutely not an afterthought at all. I recognise that some courses had finished already, or assessments are done. At the same time, some have not, and also we wanted to give students the opportunity to return back to university for the broader university experience, that to their university accommodation, if they wanted to. And that's why allowing it from the 17th is really important. We wanted to get students back earlier, absolutely. Nobody even wanted the lockdown, but we had to have that to protect the NHS and also to combat the spread of the virus. These were necessary measures that were taken in order to achieve that. And it's been a really difficult year for students, including on the impact on their mental health and their well-being, which is one of the reasons why, from the very beginning, I've encouraged and really pushed universities to go further on mental health and wellbeing support and work with the OFS on a £3 million student space project. In addition, we've set up a mental health higher education working group to ensure that students are fully aware of all of the resources available.
Cool. So we'll get onto mental health a little bit more in a moment, but you were just talking about funding there. You mentioned earlier this week that an additional £85 million has been made available to help support students, including those who are struggling to pay for accommodation. Just to confirm, is this on top of the 70 million that had previously been announced, or is this an additional 15 million, which brings the total to 85?
It's an additional 15, which brings the total to 85 million, which is on top of the 256 million that at the very beginning of the pandemic we allowed more flexibility for universities to be able to use.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. But unfortunately, either way, so the NUS Vice President for Higher Education pointed out, as part of our accommodation survey earlier this year, that if the English government was going to match the Welsh government in terms of hardship funding per student, the amount needed would be over 700 million, which is over double what has been pledged by the English government. And also as part of that survey, we found that an estimated £1 billion has been wasted by students on accommodation that they couldn't use, and that includes any refunds that have been given. So with students kind of crying out for extra support, why are they instead faced with the same £9,000 a year plus fees and kind of a lack of financial support from the government?
Yeah, so in terms of the fees, universities in this country are autonomous in law. As a government, we set the maximum level of tuition fees that universities can charge. Every university during the pandemic has decided to continue to charge that maximum, so we've been very clear, if they continue to do that, then we expect the quantity of provision to stay the same, the quality of provision to stay the same, and also for it to be accessible for all, including those that are studying remotely. The OFS have been monitoring that. If students have concerns, they can do a notification process on the OFS website, or they can do a formal complaint at the university, and if still unhappy, they can go to the OIA, which can lead to a fee refund. We've seen a number of case studies published by the OIA recently, and some students getting up to £5,000 back in refunds. On the accommodation issue, we've urged all student accommodation providers, including universities, to refund money for or give discount for when students were not able to access it. We've seen a number of them come forward and do that. But we've put hardship funding there, but that particularly for those that are not able to access that. So some students may have a private landlord that only has one or two properties, relies on that for their income, they haven't been able to refund students. And if that has presented financial hardship to the student, I would urge them to go to the university, apply for the hardship funding. UK estimate that the average money that is awarded to a student is to the tune of about £1,000. So we are talking substantial figures. And we've said all along that students should be able to keep applying to hardship funding, so it shouldn't be like a one application policy at all.
Okay, I mean, I think a lot of students will still feel that potentially that's not quite enough funding, but we'll move on to mental health support. So obviously it is Mental Health Awareness Week. And from what I can see, the new mental health support announced for higher education this week is essentially just a round table on suicide prevention. So I wanted to ask, if mental health and suicide prevention is such a priority for the government, why hasn't there been any significant, or in some cases any extra funding for mental health services?
There certainly has been some extra funding. So the government pledged 500 million to support children and young people's mental health, and 13 million of that was announced a few weeks ago, which will support young people up to the age of 25, so including university students, with that transition from children's mental health support all the way to adults' mental health support. And that's just one example of additional funding that's been given there. We also worked with the Office for Students to produce mental health support in the form of a student space, which is a £3 million project which adds in and fills in some of the gaps during the pandemic. We've been working with universities to push and promote them to go further, and also looking ahead to next year. We have included in the Strategic Priorities Grant, that's the money that comes from the taxpayer to universities, a £15 million pot to support mental health, in particular with the transition from school or college to universities, bearing in mind how difficult it will be this year given the pandemic.
So obviously, okay, so there are some bits of money being put aside for different mental health services, but I think something that we see a lot at Save the Student is that money is a real cause of mental health problems for students. So 58% say that their mental health suffers as a result of money issues. 71% worry about making ends meet. And something that we find year on year in our National Student Money Survey is that the maintenance loan just isn't enough. So every year there's a huge shortfall between the monthly maintenance loan equivalent and the monthly living costs. In the most recent survey, the gap was £220 a month. So that's £220 every month that students have to make up. And students are turning to, say, gambling, high interest loans, sex work, just because they have a dire need for cash. So again, bear in mind that 71% of students worry about making ends meet, and evidently it is a serious cause of mental health issues. Does the government accept that the maximum maintenance loan, even the maximum amount, isn't big enough? And more importantly, are they planning to do anything about that?
So we've always acknowledged that it isn't designed to pay for all of the costs that a student may face. It's a contribution, and that's why it's means tested based on parental or carer income. However, that said, we keep all of these things under review, absolutely. But during the pandemic, we're talking about a real specific and different challenges that university students have faced, as you pointed out. Some of the pressures around accommodation, or potentially not being able to work at this time because sectors closed in the lockdown, and that's exactly why we gave universities 85 million of additional money so that they could support students with hardship funding at this time.
So just to go back to it again though, the maximum maintenance loan, I think even in a case of, so the maximum would be, for England anyway, would be a student living in London, not with their parents. That is, give or take, roughly the same as an annual minimum wage job for someone aged 18 or over. And if you get to someone aged, say, 21 or over, then it's significantly more. So in most cases, the maintenance loan that a student gets, even if they are completely estranged from their parents, is not the same as a minimum wage. So, it's difficult to see how a student is meant to survive on that.
So as I said, it is designed to be a contribution with top-ups given from people's parents or from themselves doing part-time jobs. It isn't meant to be all-encompassing because the cost that every student will face will vary, even within London or within the same city, depending on their accommodation choices and the nature of their courses, etc. But during the pandemic, students have faced additional challenges and difficulties financially, and I completely agree with you on the link between financial pressures and mental health, which is one of the reasons why we prioritise getting that 85 million out of the door quickly so that universities could assist students at this time.
So there you have it, guys. Thanks for watching, and remember, for loads more info and advice on surviving on a student budget, you can head to savethestudent.org or follow us on all our social channels at Save the Student.